It was a dreary Tuesday afternoon, the kind where rain drizzled softly against the windows and the world outside seemed muted and introspective. I sat in my car, parked discreetly near my wife's office, my breath catching as I peered through the glass. What I witnessed that day, her laughing and whispering intimately with a stranger across the reception area, was a moment so raw and unexpected that it immediately confirmed my darkest suspicions. In that split second, every promise we had shared, every secret vow, crumbled into bitter ash. 4 years, I had believed that our marriage was a fortress built on trust, mutual respect, and shared dreams. We had planned our future with hopeful excitement, discussing vacations, building a cozy home, and even mapping out the quiet routines of everyday life. My wife was my confidant, my partner in every way I had ever imagined, and her presence in my life had always felt secure. But in the recesses of my mind, a small seed of doubt had taken root, a whisper that perhaps all was not as it seemed. I'd noticed the subtle things, the lingering glances at her phone during our dinner conversations, the moments when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and the inexplicable tension when she mentioned staying late at the office. I'd brushed them off as the everyday distractions of a busy professional life. Until that day. That day, I had made a spontaneous decision, a need to confirm the whispers of my doubts. Instead of waiting for her usual departure, I had arrived at her office unannounced, hiding my nervous anticipation behind the pretense of an errand. I parked a few blocks away, my heart pounding as I observed the building's modern facade. I remembered countless times when I had been reassured by her casual mentions of meetings and deadlines, her words a soothing balm that silenced any emerging worries. But today, something was different. I slipped from my car and made my way slowly toward the building, each step heavy with foreboding. My pulse raced with every breath, the sound of my own footsteps seemed too loud in the stillness of the rainy afternoon. I reached the main entrance and paused, gathering my thoughts as I watched her office building, a structure of glass and steel that, to me, represented the professional world where she worked diligently. With trembling hands, I pressed the buzzer for the floor where her office was located, pretending it was a routine call for assistance. The intercom crackled, and after a few seconds, I heard her voice, a familiar, soothing tone that I had always trusted. I greeted her casually, masking the dread that churned in my stomach. She responded cheerfully, but there was something in her voice, an uneasy hesitation, that betrayed a hidden truth. She excused herself and told me she'd check on what I needed, leaving me alone in the quiet lobby. I wandered slowly through the corridors, peering into glass-walled offices, until I reached the reception area. It was there that I saw it, a scene that froze me in place. My wife was standing near the reception desk, laughing softly with a man I'd never seen before. Their body language was intimate, an unspoken conversation of shared secrets and inside jokes. I could barely breathe. Time seemed to slow as I watched them, the laughter, the soft, conspiratorial tone in her voice, and the way they leaned toward each other were all undeniable. Every fiber of my being screamed that my worst fears had been confirmed. I turned away, heart shattered, and retreated into the shadows of the building, my mind a chaotic swirl of disbelief, betrayal, and a burgeoning resolve. For the rest of that day, I felt as if I were living in a haze. My mind replayed the scene over and over, the way her hand had brushed against his, the look in her eyes that held an intimacy I had never known between us. I couldn't shake the vision from my mind. Once home, I locked myself in our study and began to document every detail, every emotion, and every thought that raced through me. I scribbled frantically in my journal, "I trusted you with my whole heart, and now I see that our promises were nothing but illusions." The words spilled out in jagged lines, each stroke a mix of agony and a growing, burning need for answers. In that solitary, painful moment, the seeds of a harsh resolve began to take root. I realized that I could no longer live in a world of half-truths and quiet deceptions. The office visit had confirmed what I had long feared. My wife was entangled in an affair, a secret relationship that was being nurtured right under my very nose. And that betrayal wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a fracture in the very foundation of our marriage, a betrayal that left me questioning every shared moment, every whispered vow. As the rain continued its relentless patter against the window, I sat there with tears streaming down my face, feeling the raw sting of heartbreak. I knew that the next steps would be the hardest of my life. I had to confront her with the truth, a truth so excruciating that it might shatter the remnants of the life we had built together. Yet, in that agony, I also felt a surge of determination, a need to reclaim my dignity and rebuild a future that was no longer defined by deception. I spent that night compiling everything I could remember, every detail of that revealing scene at the office, every anxious moment leading up to it, and every question that now burned in my heart. I began to trace the subtle signs that I had once dismissed, the fleeting glances at her phone, the hushed laughter when she thought I wasn't listening, the soft sighs when she mentioned her late meetings. All of it now formed a tapestry of betrayal, a tapestry that demanded to be unraveled. In those final hours before sleep, as I clutched my journal and stared into the darkness, I made a silent vow: I would no longer be a prisoner of ignorance and false hope. I would confront the hidden truths, demand the answers I so desperately needed, and reclaim the life I deserved. The pain was immense, but so was the realization that every lie she had spun had only served to awaken a fiercer, more resilient version of myself. By the time I finally drifted off to sleep, my heart was heavy with sorrow but alight with a new purpose. I knew that the journey ahead would be arduous and filled with painful confrontations, legal battles, and a long road to healing. But I also knew that the truth, raw, unforgiving, and utterly liberating, was the only path forward. In that moment, as I lay in the dark, I resolved to transform my heartbreak into the fuel for a rebirth, a future where every scar would be a testament to my strength and every tear would pave the way to a life defined by truth and self-respect. In the days following that fateful discovery, every moment felt charged with the weight of a secret world I had never imagined existed. My heart was a turbulent sea of grief, fury, and a fierce resolve to reclaim the life I thought we'd built together. I became a man haunted by the truth that every evening I had returned home to what I believed was our shared sanctuary, while she was busy constructing an entirely different reality behind my back. The evidence, those undeniable digital footprints from her office visit, reverberated in my mind like a relentless drumbeat. I couldn't shake the memory of that glimpse, the furtive smiles, the intimate tones exchanged in a space that was supposed to be purely professional. They all merged into a piercing pain that spurred me into action. 4 days, I drifted through our home in a state of numb disillusionment. I found myself wandering the quiet halls, each room echoing with memories of laughter that now seemed tainted by betrayal. At night, I'd sit alone in our study, the soft glow of my desk lamp illuminating a chaos of thoughts and unshed tears. I pored over every detail, cross-referencing the timestamps from her work communications with my recollections of the day. I began to see a pattern emerge: long hours unaccounted for, vague explanations that never quite added up, and an ever-growing list of subtle signs that I had once dismissed as harmless distractions. Now, each one was a painful brick in the wall of deceit that had built up between us. I spent hours pouring my anguish into my journal, writing in jagged, horrid lines: I believed in you. I trusted you with my heart, and yet every promise has turned to a lie. The act of writing, raw and cathartic, became both my torment and my salvation. In that quiet solitude, I resolved that I would no longer be a passive recipient of her betrayals. I had to confront her, demand the truth and force her to reckon with the consequences of the hidden life she had built at work. The thought of that confrontation both terrified and galvanized me. It was not merely about uncovering an affair, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my future, and the very essence of who I was. The idea of the confrontation consumed me. I began to rehearse every word, every question, as if my reflection in the mirror were my only audience. When did this secret life begin? I'd ask, voice trembling initially, then growing steadier with each repetition. Who is he, the man behind those messages? Why did you let our love be reduced to a charade? The questions were both a demand for accountability and a catharsis for the pain that had lodged itself deep within me. I was determined that the day I confronted her, I would leave no room for excuses, no space for denial. At the same time, I reached out to those who had always been my steadfast allies. One rainy evening, I met with my friend Marcus at a quiet cafe tucked away on a quiet side street. Over steaming cups of coffee, I recounted every detail: the suspicious texts, the overheard laughter at her office, the secret signals that had led me to that devastating moment. Marcus's eyes grew dark with empathy and anger. You trusted her with your whole world, he said, voice low and steady. It's time to reclaim that trust by demanding the truth, even if it means shattering everything. His words were a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone in this struggle and that my pain was shared by others who had faced similar betrayals. Emboldened by Marcus's support, I spent the next few days meticulously compiling every scrap of evidence into a dossier that could not be ignored. I printed out every screenshot of her private messages, transcribed every timestamp from her office's Bluetooth logs, and organized all the data into a chronological timeline. Every piece of information, however small, became a loud, undeniable declaration of her infidelity. With each new entry, the mounting evidence forged a damning record, a testament to the systematic deception that had eroded the trust we once shared. I would often sit at my desk, eyes fixed on the glowing screen, as I pieced together the puzzle of her betrayal. The data was cold and unyielding, yet it resonated with the searing pain of every moment I had been deceived. I felt a deep, burning need to expose this truth, not only to her, but to the world, so that the silence that had once cocooned her lies would be shattered by the harsh light of reality. I began drafting the confrontation in my mind, each line of dialogue sharpening into a weapon of truth. I deserve to know, I rehearsed, I deserve the whole truth. No more secrets. Those words, repeated over and over, became my mantra, an affirmation that I would not let her deception define my future. As the day of the confrontation inched closer, I felt a mix of apprehension and a surging, resolute determination. I planned every detail, the setting, the tone, and even the exact order in which I would present the evidence. I envisioned a scene where, amid the sterile quiet of our living room, the truth would be laid out in stark, irrefutable detail. I imagined her face as the evidence washed over her, a face contorting with shock, guilt, and ultimately, the realization that the time for excuses had long passed. I pictured the silence that would fall after each damning piece of evidence was revealed, the heavy pause where words would be insufficient to capture the betrayal that had been committed. In the final hours before the confrontation, I took long, solitary walks in the chill of early morning. The rhythm of my footsteps on rain-washed sidewalks became a meditative cadence that steadied my nerves. I allowed the cool air to clear the remnants of despair from my mind, replacing it with a fierce clarity that promised redemption through truth. With every step, I felt the fragments of my shattered self slowly coalesce into something more formidable, a determination that no matter how deeply I had been hurt, I would rise, reclaiming my identity piece by piece. That night, under a sky draped in heavy, oppressive clouds, I prepared myself for the ultimate reckoning. I sat in our study one last time, the compiled dossier spread out before me like a map of betrayal, and I whispered to myself, "This ends now." I knew that the confrontation would be brutal, a clash of raw emotion and unyielding truth, but it was a moment I had been building toward since the first shattering realization. I would no longer be the man who silently suffered, I would become the man who demanded accountability and reclaimed the future that was rightfully mine. As I wrote the final words in my journal, I felt both the ache of betrayal and the spark of a new beginning. The evidence was my shield, the truth my sword. I was prepared to confront her, to expose every lie, and to force the hidden secrets of our marriage into the open. The path ahead would be steep and littered with the remnants of a love once cherished, but it was a path I had to walk if I were to reclaim my dignity. I was determined that from this storm of deception, a new life would be born, a life defined by honesty, resilience, and the unwavering power of self-respect. I woke the next morning to a silence so profound it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. In that quiet moment, every echo of yesterday's revelation, the secret conversation, the furtive smiles, the damning digital traces, resounded like a thunderclap in my heart. I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The betrayal I had witnessed at her office was no longer a distant suspicion but a brutal, undeniable truth that demanded retribution and forced me to rebuild my life from the wreckage of our shattered dreams. The confrontation had left a scar on me that I would carry forever. In the days that followed, I moved through our once shared home like a ghost. Every room, every familiar piece of furniture, now bore the imprint of that fateful day when I discovered her secret, a secret that had transformed our marriage into a stage for deception. I spent hours alone in our study, poring over the evidence I had meticulously compiled, each document a nail in the coffin of the trust we once shared. The Bluetooth logs, the timestamps, the overheard voices, all of it had merged into an overwhelming storm of betrayal that I could no longer ignore. And yet, amid the relentless ache, a quiet resolve began to form. I understood that while the pain was immense, it also offered me a choice, to be defined by the betrayal or to rise from it, rebuilt and stronger than ever. That choice crystallized on the day I finally confronted her. I invited her to our living room, a space that had once echoed with laughter and shared secrets, but now felt as sterile and cold as the truth I was about to lay bare. My heart pounded as I placed the dossier of evidence on the coffee table. The room was filled with a suffocating silence as I looked into her eyes that had once been warm and reassuring but now flickered with a mixture of guilt and dread. "I trusted you with everything," I said, my voice steady but laced with the bitter residue of heartbreak. "I believed our life was built on honesty and love. But these," I gestured to the folder, "these are the lies that have defined our marriage. Explain to me how you could live a double life while pretending that everything was normal." Her response was a shattered whisper. For a few excruciating minutes, she fumbled with her words, trying to justify late nights at the office, hurried excuses about meetings that never happened. But the evidence was irrefutable. With every piece of data I presented, her defenses crumbled. I could see the anguish and fear in her eyes as the reality sank in. In that moment, I realized that forgiveness had long been a luxury I could no longer afford. The betrayal was not a mistake, it was deliberate, systematic, and it had cut too deeply. After that confrontation, the silence between us was deafening. I left our home that day with a heavy heart but an even heavier determination to reclaim my life. I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with pain, legal battles, and the daunting task of rebuilding a future that had been built on false promises. Yet, each step I took away from that day felt like a small victory, a defiant declaration that I would no longer be defined by her deception. The next few weeks became a blur of legal consultations, painful goodbyes to shared memories, and an unyielding focus on self-reclamation. I filed for divorce, determined that the final severance of our marital ties was necessary not just for legal closure, but for my own emotional liberation. Every court appearance, every document signed, was a ritual of letting go, a methodical dismantling of the life that had been built on lies. I worked with a trusted attorney who guided me through the labyrinth of joint finances, shared assets, and all the remnants of a partnership that had once seemed unbreakable. With each legal step, I felt a piece of the betrayal being locked away, a part of that secret life that no longer had any power over me. Outside the courtroom, I turned inward, seeking solace in the quiet moments of reflection. I took long walks under the early morning sky, letting the chill of dawn and the gentle rhythm of my footsteps soothe the raw edges of my broken heart. I revisited old hobbies, the music that once brought us together, the books that had always been my escape, and even the simple pleasure of watching the sunset over the horizon. Each moment became a reminder that life, no matter how deeply it is marred by betrayal, also holds the promise of renewal. I began to transform my living space into a sanctuary for my rebirth. I redecorated with intention, choosing colors and textures that spoke of hope and resilience. The walls that had once witnessed our shared dreams were now adorned with art that celebrated the indomitable human spirit, a phoenix rising from ashes, bold and unyielding. Every change in my home was a conscious step toward shedding the old, painful memories and embracing a future defined by my own truth. I also found solace in writing. My private blog, which had once been a place of quiet introspection, soon became a platform for sharing my journey with raw, unfiltered honesty. I recounted every painful detail, from the moment I discovered the secret messages on her phone to the final confrontation where the truth was laid bare. Readers from all walks of life responded with messages of support, sharing their own stories of betrayal and healing. Their voices were a reminder that I was not alone in my struggle, that the wounds of deceit could eventually give way to growth and transformation. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, the cool breeze of the night mingling with my thoughts. I gazed out at the city lights, each one a tiny beacon of hope against the dark canvas of the night. In that quiet moment, I realized that while the scars of betrayal might never fully vanish, they had become symbols of my strength, a record of the battles I had fought and won. I vowed to myself that I would never let anyone diminish my worth again. I would guard my heart fiercely and build a life where truth and respect were non-negotiable. The final chapter of that turbulent period came when the divorce was finalized. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming mix of relief and bittersweet triumph. The legal end of our union was not just the closure of a painful chapter, but the beginning of a new story, my story. I now stood as a man reborn, defined not by the betrayal that had once broken him, but by the resilience that had carried him through. The pain, although still present in quiet moments, no longer held the power to dictate my future. I continued to rebuild, piece by piece, my life transforming slowly into something new and profoundly my own. I immersed myself in work, channeling my hurt into creative projects that showcased my renewed passion for life. I reconnected with friends and forged new relationships based on honesty and shared values. I even began to explore the possibility of love again, cautiously stepping forward with the wisdom of someone who had been burned by deceit but who refused to close his heart entirely. Today, as I sit by a window watching the sun break through a crisp morning sky, a sky that seems to promise endless new beginnings, I reflect on the journey that has brought me here. The betrayal I suffered was a fierce storm that nearly swept me away, but from its wreckage, I have emerged with a clarity and strength I never thought possible. My past, filled with secrets and lies, is now a testament to my resilience. I have learned that true healing comes not from forgetting, but from embracing the truth, however painful it may be, and using it as the foundation for a future built on unwavering self-respect and honesty. In that final, transformative moment, I reclaimed my identity. I turned my pain into purpose, my heartbreak into a beacon for those who might one day face similar trials. I have built a life where every scar is a badge of honor, a reminder that even when our deepest vulnerabilities are exposed, we have the power to rise, rebuild, and shine with the light of truth.